Today's episode is going to be a little bit different, and hopefully I'd like to start branching out the series. Crapper Chat is basically kind of sit down and more laid back kind of content where I kind of discuss about some eras of plumbing throughout the history, or talk about some things like, for this video's example, misconceptions, and even more than that. I figured I'd start this series by obviously starting off with a top 5 list, and that list will be based on the misconceptions of certain toilet or urinal model names. For this video's sake, we're going to be talking about mostly Crane, Universal Rundle, American Standard, and Eljer. If I do a part 2 of this video, and I probably will, I'll include more companies to talk about. But for now, we're going to be focusing on these companies. And who knows, I might even throw in a bonus entry, so let's get started. Starting off this list is probably the most controversial one yet. The debate between the Crane or Universal Rundle Atlas versus the Athens. Back in the old days, we used to refer to the Athens and Atlas by their ball shape. If they were round ball, they were Atlases. If they were elongated, they were Athens. Man, I don't know what we were on back then. Then again, this was also the same era we considered Cadet 2's Space Saver Cadets and round ball bricks conservers Radcliffes. Yes, I am that old. Before we discuss the main differences, I would like to ask a simple question. What came first, the Atlas or the Athens? Well, this one is about as easy as it sounds. It was the Atlas, and here's your proof. As you can see here, this is a new old stock Universal Rundle Atlas tank. And as you can see, it's a classic 80s style tank used back in the day. That being discussed, there's obviously 3 different generations of the Atlas. You obviously have the 3.5 version from the 1980s to 90s, and then you got 2 water-saving versions. You have the second generation with the very lanky trapway, where it looks tall, but it's kind of small. And then there's the third generation that would carry on the Atlas and eventually the Athens, which is pretty much right in the middle in terms of trapway size. Sometime around 1995, the tanks would be eventually redesigned, and they would move over to this tank right over here. That means this is an Atlas. Now, the Athens is quite an interesting story because it came a lot later in Universal Rundle's lifespan, circa 1997. This would actually use the same exact bowl as the Atlas, as you can kind of see here. But the only difference is that they would use the Atlas style tank, which is basically this fake knockoff Kohler style tank with the rectangular handle, as seen here. That means this is an Athens. And despite old beliefs, they could either be round or elongated, and obviously covered height. Now let me throw in one more bone into this mix. The Atlas Elite, which is quite literally an Atlas ball on a Crane Galaxy tank. No, I'm not kidding, that's literally a thing. Weirdly enough, this thing has existed since the early 2000s, but by around circa 2006, it would pretty much replace both the Atlas and the Athens. So, take of it as you will. Now let's discuss the interesting Eljer urinal situation between the Eljer Bedfordshire and the Eljer Murray urinal. We all know the classic Eljer Bedfordshire urinal. 2 generations of very interesting design choices. Obviously the first one was much more interesting compared to the second, but I digress. This is a classic P-trap washout urinal that Eljer offered, but eventually they would offer another, the Eljer Murray urinal. So not only did they have the Eljer Murray toilet, they also had an Eljer Murray urinal. And honestly, this design looks more vintage than the second generation of Eljer Bedfordshire, which is quite weird. Not much is really known about the Eljer Murray urinal. It could have existed since the 1980s or something like that, but I don't really know about it. I do know for sure it's been around since the 1990s though, and for a weird short period of time from the mid to late 1990s, it was like a temporary replacement for the Eljer Bedfordshire urinal. And the only reason I really assume that is because during the late 1990s, shown on this Eljer website from back in the day, the Eljer Bedfordshire was not offered as a P-trap urinal. It was just only the Murray, which is very weird. Eventually, the Eljer Bedfordshire will be back in the early 2000s, and the Eljer Murray will also still be sold around the same timeline until Eljer was bought out by American Standard in the late 2000s. This is just very weird, and honestly, I don't know why they even made two different P-trap urinals. But hey, now you know the Eljer Murray is a thing, not only in toilet form, but in urinal form too. Very weird. While we're talking about urinals, let's open the can of worms that is crane urinals, because this is a mess. Let's start by talking about the Crane Cromwell, a urinal that's been used since the late 1960s. But wait, I hear you say, didn't the Cromwell exist back in the day? No. Before the Cromwell was a thing in the late 60s, these urinals right here were known as Crane Correctos. Crane Correcto? What? Crane Correcto? I heard of the Eljer Correcto, but not the Crane Correcto. Well, this is actually a thing that actually happened back in the day. Ever since the early 1900s, these have been referred to as Correctos. What a weird timeline. While we're discussing that, let's talk about the Del Rios, which originally were called New Rios, with a U, before the late 60s happened. Now, the Bedford discussion can be a little bit weird, but before that, while I don't know anything about the Bedfords and if they were both back outlet and bottom outlet before the 2000s, but again, before the late 60s, these were known as Crane Bedfordshires. So yes, there's not only the Eljer Bedfordshire, but there's also the Crane Bedfordshire. Man, this is such a mess. Okay, your head's probably hurting, so I'll do one more urinal, and let's talk about a newer crane urinal. This is not a Bedford. It's a Colburn. I'm sorry. New Colburn. Sorry. Yeah, this really shouldn't be surprising to some people, considering that this is literally a direct copy from the Universal Rundle Colburn from the 1990s. So seeing it in the crane era known as Colburn is not really shocking to me, honestly. It's really not. But the back outlet version is known as a Bedford. Alright, let's move on before we lose our heads. While we're on the topic of Universal Rundle, let's move back into that by talking about the Universal Rundle Citations. Or is it even really called that? Because according to my Universal Rundle catalog, they were known as Mercury, both the first and second generation. To be completely honest, I don't even know where the citation name came from, and I could really say that about any of the toilet models we discussed back in the old days, but that's a story for another day. Both of these are known as Mercuries, with the first generation basically being based on the Universal Rundle Castle toilet. And then you also got the new Mercury, which is based on the second generation, which that generation has that rectangular trapway opening and can sometimes even have two jets. This is a weird name for a toilet model, not gonna lie. And honestly, I like the name Citations better, but technically speaking, both of these are known as Mercury. The last thing I want to discuss here is this Eljer flushometer toilet. It is not called an Ultra. It's called the Preserver for some reason. So not only are there different tank versions available, there's also the flushometer bowl, also known as Preserver. From what I can find, it was always called the Preserver, and I cannot find anything about them being called Ultras. I honestly also want to know where that name even came from. But these were called Preservers, weirdly enough. And they don't preserve anything because they suck. But that's a review for another day. And just for the heck of it, even though this is kind of pointless, some people are confused about this one, so I'll throw in a bonus one. The Cadet versus the Cadet 2. As seen in this catalog, these are confirmed Cadet 2s, and not Space Saver Cadets. And obviously these are regular Cadets from the 1.6 era. They're not Cadet 2s. I don't know why people are still getting us confused, even though there really isn't that much confusion with them. But there you go. That being said though, I think the 1.6 Cadet era would be an interesting topic for another video like this, because there's actually some interesting spin-offs, as you'll soon see. But I think that'll be enough for today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed and learned something out of this. Until next time.